This is lecture number 25 of Introduction to Ethics, RPH 205. And now we are starting on another section of the class, the last section, and we're talking about the Greek culture and their view of health. So all the way through, we've focused back on Aristotle and his idea of flourishing, activities of soul in accordance with virtue, in a complete life, in a political community. But this is the broader culture, which I think is consistent with Aristotle's view. So I'm going to start out by talking about their deities, the Olympic gods, and then I'll talk about the oracle at Delphi. All right, so here is the Olympian deities. All right, so I call the Greek view spiritual humanism. And this is really a more sophisticated view of spirituality than Lutzig or Haidt or even Capra have, because we've been cut off from our ancient past. And so they're realizing that those ancient wisdom cultures have a lot to offer, and that there is a need to return to the kind of community, the kind of practices, the kind of rituals. But this is about the Greek view of the human spirit. It's called a daimon. And Socrates talked about the daimon and the daimonic. And it sees human beings as between gods and animals, okay? We evolved from the natural world, and we have a very animalistic side to ourselves. We have the brain stem, and it triggers pleasure and fear. But we also have this capacity to think in very theoretical ways. And for Aristotle, theoria is natural because there are patterns out there in the world, and we have this capacity to understand them. And so we also have the power of choice. So when we understand a pattern and we try to educate each other about how to live, we also know that people make mistakes and people disagree. And so these myths grew up over time. They just developed. This is called a poetic tradition, really, rather than any one doctrine. But it shows, I am going to teach it as if there are male and female counterparts to various layers of culture that together make up a human civilization. These forces are always there within us, around us, and the wise person is the one that's in touch with all these, that recognizes all of these forces, and also is able to compromise, balance, figure out what the best thing to do is in a given situation, and explain why and be able to persuade other people. But these are the stories of the deities, and the stories are about each deity has a sacred passion, like justice, truth, etc. But the stories about them are that they're obsessed. So when human beings act the way the gods act, it's dysfunctional. I mean, human beings create a lot of problems when they just become obsessed with one sacred passion and they ignore all the rest. Because human beings are mortal, not immortal. And their lives are complicated, and they have to balance and they have to compromise. And the stories tell about what happens when you don't. So every human society exists within the context of a natural world that is, in fact, more powerful than we are. And there's a male and female force. Poseidon is the god of the sea and also the winds. So if you upset Poseidon, he'll cause a hurricane and a flood, and he'll destroy your ships if you're at sea. He's also the god of earthquakes. So, I mean, these are forces beyond our control, and we ought to honor Poseidon. We ought to make sure not to make him angry by changing the climate, for example. And then Demeter is the goddess of fertility, which is human fertility, fertility of the earth. And if you mess with her and you make her mad, she starves you out. She just doesn't let things grow. Desertification. So that's the idea, is that each of these deities represents realities within which human beings live and work and have their being, right? The limitations of human culture, and they are trying to teach you how to design a culture that's sustainable and that aims toward the cultivation of human excellence and that avoids some of the obvious mistakes. So justice is Zeus and Athena. The god and goddesses of honor are Hera and Ares. All these things are important. These are all Aristotelian virtues, if you remember. Justice is rule for the sake of the ruled. Honor is Hera weaves together a higher quality of life, social networks. And then Apollo, the god of reason, he's the one that built cities, and his twin sister couldn't care less about cities. She's the goddess of the wilderness. And then with sensuality, you have Aphrodite, is the goddess of beauty, and Dionysus is the goddess of wine, and the god of wine, the god of the theater. Then the god and goddess of the underworld, and this capacity for reflection. So pattern recognition. This is Hestia and Hermes. So just the big picture is that every day we experience these different forces. They're outside of us, they're within us, and we have to function within this context and do it as well as we can. So this is Poseidon, god of the sea, as I said. You don't mess with him. He'll create earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and especially the Greeks, right? They very much depended on the sea for food, for travel. And so they make sure you honor Poseidon and Demeter, the goddess of fertility. All right, then the god of justice, Zeus is king of the gods, and his his daughter, Athena. Athena is the goddess of justice, of war, and of the arts. So she and her dad are the ones who prevail, right? Um, Govern. Her father is the one who rules, but she wants to give him counsel. So she doesn't want to have a power struggle with him, but she wants to tell him what to do and what not to do once in a while. And he has affairs. He, forcibly forces himself upon goddesses, upon women, and they are harmed, psychologically harmed, and they deliver children that are psychologically harmed and that don't pay attention to him, don't act justly. So Athena is kind of telling him not to do that and also not to get so angry. He gets angry. So just to give you a couple examples, his first wife was Metis, good judgment. She's the one that prevails when the gods meet. She sort of keeps the order. And she had such good judgment that he was afraid he would have a child that would overthrow him. He has a big ego. So he plays a game with her. They take turns being different animals, and she turns into a fly and he swallows her. And turns out she was pregnant. And so Zeus gets this terrible headache, and Hephaestus, the god of the forge, cracks open his skull, and Athena emerges. Now, that's a crazy story, but it has a psychological meaning. So, Athena is, there's a certain personality type. So, Athena's worst weakness is that she's a male identified woman. She forgets that she was born of a woman. She doesn't, she thinks she came straight, full blown from the forehead of Zeus. And so these are women who like power. They run for office, or they're a CEO, or they run, you know, they run for lots of different positions because they like to exercise power. Um, but if a woman is more maternal, like Demeter, for example, she wants to take time off of work to take care of her kids, the Athenas won't cut them slack. How come you aren't playing the game the way the men do? So it's called a male identified woman. And sometimes they're harder on child identified women, or wounded women, psychologically wounded. They're harder on them than some men are. So Athena has her weakness, but in general, she's wiser than her dad, just like he was worried about. Um, and she also has a little brother, half brother, Ares, and he is the god of war. But she, so I'll tell you that story later, but Athena is the goddess of war, but only just wars, not unjust wars, unlike her brother. Okay, so Ares, the god of war. So what happened is Zeus, after he married Meta, he married Hera. And he liked Hera because she identified with being his wife. And so she just wanted to raise the quality of life in the polis. And this would be the woman who is married to a powerful person in town. And she runs the charity balls and she's on the hospital board, the library board. She, runs the town in these volunteer capacities. And there aren't as many of these types anymore, and that's too bad, because there's a lot of small towns that used to be run by these women, and now it's a lot of the only women home with their kids are fundamentalists, or there's kind of a vacuum there for highly educated women to be doing volunteer work and improving the quality of life. Anyway, um, so Zeus dishonors her by having these affairs. And of course, that makes her furious because her identity is caught up in being the wife of the king. And when he cheats on her, it's very humiliating, right? And so she got mad at him and had a child without him. And Hephaestus, that's one way of telling the story. And he was born crippled. Another way of telling the story of Hephaestus, why he was crippled, was that Zeus was having his affairs, and Hephaestus was protecting his mother, and he got mad at his dad. And his dad threw him down Mount Olympus. But this is, these are family systems where, a powerful dad who cheats on his wife, sure, there would be a son, the mother comes and is grieving, and the son supports his mother and gets into a conflict with his dad. I'm sure that happens a lot. But anyway, Hephaestus is an introvert, and he's the god of the forge. So he's a craftsman. He's sort of alone a lot, making beautiful things with his sword, with his uh, at the forge. Um, all right, so that's Hera, and then Ares. He's the child of Zeus and Hera, and he gets honor by being brave in war. But the trouble with Ares is that he just likes to be machismo. He wants to prove himself by going out into dangerous situations. And he has a double-edged sword, and he just goes and kills people just to show that he can do it. Well, Zeus condemns him, Hera condemns him, and Athena condemns him. And so the message there is not to value war for its own sake. Don't overvalue war. Value diplomacy more than war. War does not solve problems, especially not when the people in it are in it just to be brutal. Or war itself will brutalize people, even if they didn't start out that way. So Ares, yeah, that's Ares. And then there's Hera, and then there's Apollo, the god of reason and music and medicine. He has a son, Asclepius, whose symbol is the double snake outside of pretty much every pharmacy. He's the god of medicine, or the son of Apollo in charge of medicine. And the story about Asclepius is that he abused his powers by bringing somebody back to life from death. And that is overstepping the bounds, right? Death is natural. You don't use your talents. Medicine is just supposed to, if people are still naturally healthy, but they're temporarily sick, you use medicine to get them back to their natural state. But if somebody's dying, that's natural. And you don't bring them back to life. Now, of course, our medical system is hell-bent on preventing the aging system, the aging process, and fighting death, and costing a lot of money, a lot of debt that we pass on to our grandchildren, which really makes me grieve. But okay, so Apollo is the god of reason. The thing about Apollo is he is emotionally immature and indifferent to justice. So he chased around nymphs, right? He's attracted to what would you call it? An infanticizing, or he just looks at women as sex objects. They're not thoughtful, they're not wise. They're just, his sexuality is triggered by just bodies, female bodies, although he's also bisexual. But those women will reject him, and then he takes revenge. He is really mean. Nobody should reject me. I'm a god. And so one woman, she was like a working class person, and she rejected him because she really didn't want to be married to a god. She wanted to marry the farmer, just have a good time. And he had given her the gift of eternal life. And when she rejected him, he cursed her with she would age and she would become a shriveled up old lady, and then she'd live forever. That is so mean. Then he gave Cassandra the gift of being able to see into the future. And when she rejected him, he cursed her with nobody would listen to her. So in the Trojan War, when Paris and Helen arrived, um, uh, she said she knew, right, that Cassandra knew that the Achaeans would come and the Trojans would get wiped out. She kept telling them, tried to tell them, but they were in a totally irrational state of mind. They wanted to kick Achaean butt. They wanted to be number one. And so she wasn't listened to and it drove her crazy. Well, yeah, I guess so. I think everybody in a certain context feels like Cassandra once in a while. I told you so. I knew that was going to happen. That's Cassandra. You're having a Cassandra moment. Anyway, there's Daphne. There were a lot of them. And then he's indifferent to justice. So he was on the side of the Achaeans who had the just cause because Paris, the son of the king of Troy, had come to visit in Argos and he stole Menelaus' wife, Helen. And that's, you can't put up with that, right? If Obama, Michelle, and Barack Obama went, for example, to Russia, which they did, but if somebody kidnapped Michelle Obama, I mean, there'd be war, right? There's no, you can't just say, oh, well, we ought to, engage in diplomacy. If it doesn't work well, I don't know if it's worth a war. Well, it is worth a war. So, breaking hospitality agreements. If you can't go visit another country without worrying about kidnapping or getting shot, this is the end of human civilization. So there have to be hospitality agreements. So Apollo starts out on the side of the Achaeans, but they start infighting so much. And Achilles and Agamemnon are having this power struggle, and it's a mess. Over here at Troy, Hector is a follower of Apollo, and he's very organized and he unifies his city, and he knows his father is wrong. He knows his little brother is a spoiled brat, but he wants to defend his city and help his people. And so Apollo switches sides. Well, what does that tell us about today? Today, you could say the whole world is run by Apollonian geniuses who are emotionally immature and indifferent to justice, or just ignorant about how to about politics. So, I mean, the latest one is Elon Musk. Now, I had somebody tell me, again, the way these rumors go, but she had seen it on some, that Elon Musk has 11 children. Well, I ought to look it up. But anyway, nobody really knows how many kids he has. Those kids are going to be so messed up. And Apollo had some kids that were messed up too. He had a kid and he was an absentee dad, right? He has these kids and he disappears and does his thing. And so he felt bad and he told the child that the boy that he'd give him whatever he wanted, right? You're spoiling. So the rich guys, powerful guys who are absentee dads tell their kids, oh, you can have whatever you want. Well, he wanted to drive the chariot. Apollo drove the chariot with the sun in it across the sky. And Apollo's, no, there's no way. You can't do that. You're not a god. You're not powerful enough. But he insisted and he crashed. Well, what's that about? That's about Elon or other people. It's not just Elon. I don't know if Jeff Bezos has any other kids. I don't have no idea, but there've always been these brilliant left brain guys who end up having a number of different families. And the children fight for the inheritance or fight for the power or whatever. And sometimes they hand over their businesses or their positions of power to their children, and the children do not know how to run them. But anyway, we still have a problem. Tyson Foods has that problem. Oh, the Ford Motor Company had that for a while. You just read about it periodically. But that's what I think of. There's a mythological story about that. So that's our country, or the world right now is being run by engineers. Bill Gates, Charles Koch, Jeff Bezos, all these people in engineering are running the world, and they're even getting involved with politics like Donald Trump. So the message from the Greek deities is that this is not going to go well. Apollo has his weaknesses, and he's not good at politics. He's not good at compromise. He makes bad judgments. He has, his family life is a mess. So here we are, we're making all the same mistakes. And then Apollo has a twin sister named Artemis, and she's the woods woman. She doesn't want anything with the city to do with the city. These are little girls from when they're in grade school. They love animals. Often they belong to the Humane Society. Maybe they ride horses if they can. That's what they want to do, is have a horse. They are environmentalists. A lot of them, though, are in sports. They're very competitive. And the weakness of Artemis is that she can be a man hater. And she she really doesn't like goddesses like Aphrodite, who's just sensual and sexy and all that. She's kind of got it out for her. And Aphrodite fell in love with a mortal, can't remember his name. But Artemis, took revenge on her by having Adonis. He was chased by her wild dogs and eaten by wild dogs. It's like, and in the Greeks, wild dogs are really the pits. I got chased by about 10 wild dogs when I was on an island in Greece. Oh my God, I never ran so fast in my life. But I can understand why they have expression, you're going to the dogs, or you're just a dog, or whatever. That's a real insult. Then you have Dionysus, the god of wine. So in the Greek view, sensuality is sacred. Okay, there's nothing repressed. All these stories are about, no, I don't really feel that way, and you push your emotions down and you deny that you have them. Forget it. The Greeks are all about, okay, you feel like taking revenge? Here's a story, and everything. And you go, okay, I don't really want to take revenge. Or you feel like having sex with a young girl. Here's a story. No, I don't want to do that. And so you gradually just teach yourself, flush it out so that you have more energy to do something positive. Also, because you know how easily people can give in to these irrational drives and how much damage they can do. You're motivated to do as much as you can to keep civilization intact because it can so easily fall apart. So you're aware of the veneer of civilization, but on the other hand, you're doing what you can to weave the social fabric together so that it can resist. It develops resilience. People have goodwill and trust for each other. They support each other. They care about each other. And you can prevent a lot of those behaviors, but if somebody gives in, you have resilience. You're not going to let it unravel you. So Dionysus is the god of wine and the god of the theater. So what's important here, okay, so he's the son of Zeus, but Zeus and Semele. And so Semele was immortal, and she wanted to know who was coming to bed with her. And Zeus didn't want her to look at him because she would burn up. And this would be like a guy who has an affair with a woman who isn't nearly in his class. And she wants to come to the dinner parties or she wants to come to the concerts. Oh no. She doesn't, she doesn't know. When are you going to marry me? That wasn't what he had in mind. So she looks at him anyway, and she burns up, but she's pregnant. And so he takes the fetus and he puts it in his thigh. And Zeus then sort of incubates the fetus, and then it's born from Zeus's thigh. Well, that's super close to his groin. And so Dionysus is a pretty wild child. Also, when if your dad misbehaves like that, you're not going to have a lot of respect for justice. He doesn't have any respect for people. He doesn't withhold his own drive. So why should I, right? Dionysus. So he he has women who come out into the woods and dance these organic or organism type dances, and they just go nuts. That's Dionysus. And so but the Greeks want to bring Dionysus incorporated into their view of reality because you can't repress it. You just release it. You let people have their orgies. And but Dionysus is the only god that dies and is reborn. And he's the god of the theater. So the theater is about people living out all these irrational passions. And then you have a purgation. You go, oh, I really don't want to do that. And then they're reborn, right? They go away from the theater more motivated to do good things, to be passionate about doing good things. Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty, but she's not supposed to be an object of male sexual stimulation, right? That's not what she's there for. She's somebody that triggers a desire to create, right? It could be to have a baby, right? To have sex. But she also is the muse. She inspires poets to write poems. She inspires anybody to be creative. Like, I feel so much love, right? That I want to create, I want to create an organization to nurture children because of this love that I feel. I want to create a book. I want to create a painting. I want to create. So she's the universal muse, and women can be muses for women. Anytime you are inspired to create something, that's Aphrodite. Then Hephaestus is the god of the forge, as I said, and he was married to Aphrodite. Okay. Um, and reminds me of my grandfather, who was a wild child, but they married him off to this little angel at the Baptist church in Des Moines, Iowa. She just died before there was too much trouble, which I assume there would have been. But okay, so Hephaestus and Aphrodite cheats, and she's completely attracted to Ares. So it's sex and aggression, right? That's the Hollywood formula. Can't have a good movie unless you have some aggression and some sex. Then you can have whatever plot you want. And they'd be attracted, and then they'd drive each other nuts. So she'd go back home to Hephaestus. And so, yeah, one night he caught them in the act, and he had a net that he made, and he put it over them. it was funny stories, but that's what that's about. When they're together, Hephaestus creates a beautiful city. He creates beautiful pottery, beautiful houses, and beautiful tables, and the material aspects of a culture. There's so much difference between something that's factory made and something that someone has thought about it and they've created something. All right. Then there is Hades. So we have the god and the goddess of the underworld. And this reminds you the story in Odysseus, he goes to the underworld. And I think the stories from the underworld are, the message is, be careful how you live because you'll end up for eternity, remembering the mistakes you made, right? You're going to have to live with your own mind for eternity, which to me just scares the heebie-jeebies out of me. It's the best way to keep myself going. So Hades, okay, so when Odysseus goes to Hades, he says, he sees Achilles, the big hero, and Achilles was a hero. He was going to kill Hector and die young. That was his choice rather than to live a mediocre life and live longer. And so Odysseus sees Achilles and said, Achilles, what's it like? He said, I hate it here. I hate it. I want to go back. I'd rather be a farmer on earth than Achilles in the underworld. And the message there is no matter how bad life gets, you're alive. Value life. Then Agamemnon is there. Now, Agamemnon had won the Trojan War. He was number one. He was like the most powerful man in the whole world. And he goes home and his wife stabs him to death. And so, because he killed their daughter, it's a long story, but it's so funny because now in Hades, he just, that's how he lives forever, as the guy whose wife stabbed him to death. Now there's slaves and all sorts of low lives around that didn't ever, don't have that to live with forever. He could have been a little less arrogant. He could have corrected for this, but no, he was too full of himself. And so I think, the stories are telling you that you should live your life in a way that leaves behind a story to be remembered. So people are inspired by your story. That's what the story I think of Hades. And then Persephone is the one that's as close to Puritanism. Is she was raped and abducted by Hades, given permission to do so by her father, Zeus. Okay, Zeus raped Demeter and Persephone was born. Persephone was a young woman picking flowers, and Hades wanted her and asked for permission, and Zeus said, fine. So he abducts her to the underworld and rapes her, and Demeter is so upset. She refuses to let the crops grow, and so everything is going to die. And Zeus finally decides they made a deal where Persephone would be with Hades half of the year and then back with Demeter. And so that explains the seasons. But Persephone in Hades, her job is to victimize people who victimized other people. So if you seek power and money, you will create victims because people are your pawns. Okay, well, when you get to the other side, you will be victimized. That's the threat, right? That's the old-fashioned hellfire brimstone version. Okay, Hestia is the goddess of the hearth. She doesn't have a throne on Mount Olympus. She had a seat, but she didn't like all the drama. So she stepped down. She has a heart, and she wants the gods and goddesses to come down and talk to each other and come to a conclusion. And then Hermes, the messenger god, takes that flame from the hearth and is a torch, takes his torch down to earth. So he's the messenger. So Hestia is, I'm a Hestia, obviously, I think. She's the one that sits back and looks for patterns and wants to get people to examine themselves and compromise and just have a dialogue, because this whole tradition is about dialogue, because nobody is totally right and nobody is totally wrong, just kind of like people. And then you come to some compromise, and then that's the light of the mind. You bring that out into the world and you try to shed some light on things, and you try to lead, and you try to make the world a better place. All right, so that's the deities. Now the next part is Delphi. Delphi is, well, let's see if I can, I assume I can get to it here. Oh, geez. Okay, let me see if I can find a way to, oh, here we go. It's over here. All right. Okay. There were two other attachments for the class today. And the other one is Delphi, the Oracle at Delphi. So this is about 800 BC. It's called the Axial Age. And all over the world, people were living together. So there was originally, when people lived together, it was extended family, just pretty much survival. Then people started coming together, partly for security, protection, and partly to trade, to have like a division of labor, to be able to meet the material conditions of their life more efficient. But then at a certain point in human history, people started to interact at the higher and higher level. It got more complicated. It dawned on somebody that, oh, we're the creature that recognizes patterns in a world where they exist. And then they start looking for patterns. And so they realize, okay, the universe is ordered and we're capable of understanding the order. Human emotions are understandable. Like we have empathy, we can understand these patterns. So all the myths are about pattern recognition and the stories that arose when somebody felt like, oh, this is a pattern. This will happen over and over. And so that's when people decided to get together at a higher level, the polis. And that's where people engage in scientific inquiry and artistic expression and free speech and all of that. But the transition was from a goddess-centered culture that was just cyclical to a culture driven by Apollo, the god of reason. So now Apollo, it's our science, engineering, technology, math. These capacities are the things that create skyscrapers and create roads and create, all this stuff. It creates cities. And so now we're going to go from primarily cyclical, rural ways of relating to this linear. And once Apollo starts driving humanity, there will be history. Every generation will be different, and every generation will be more complex, because the Apollonian capacity will have created. The word techne means a creation, right? It's a human creation, right? It's not reproduction, it's a techne, technology. So this is the transition. So this is about, Delphi is where the goddess was worshipped before 800 BC, and she was protected by the python, the snake. The python is a symbol of a cyclical culture because it sheds skin and grows a new skin, but every year is the same. And so now Apollo is going to come and kill the python, and now he's going to protect the goddess with reason. All right? So it isn't super violence, it's about the least possible violence. Plus, Apollo then has to serve penance for 7 years. And so, what I think all these stories are about is that this transition, you have to be careful. And when you start having an Apollonian-driven society, you must respect nature. You do not force the goddess. You do not exploit the goddess. You don't destroy the goddess, but you protect the goddess with reason rather than the snake. You're replacing the snake, but you're still protecting nature. All right, so there were many stories about this site. It was a place where goddess was worshipped. It was at the foot of Mount Parnassus, the highest mountain in northern Greece. It was a place where Zeus had released 2 eagles, his animal symbols, eagle, and they flew around the world and they came back right there, right? A whole lot of stuff associated. But anyway, after Apollo killed okay, there's Mount Parnassus, and this is actually the temple, and here's the temple again. Then it was okay, originally to Gaia, all right. So it's a story of evolution from nature to culture. This is the stone that Kronos swallowed. Let's see, in their creation story, they have this transition. Originally, there was Uranus and Gaia, heaven and earth, and then they had a child because heaven and earth, and then they had children that were earthquakes, and well, there were earthquakes, there were the earth started to have a history. So because there was a before and an after, one of their children is Chronos, time, because it gave birth to time. This isn't just a rock, forever revolving around the earth. It's actually has its own history. So, but Uranus abused his power and he didn't want Kronos to take over. He wants to be powerful forever. And so they get in a big power struggle. And it's a long story, but eventually Kronos takes over. And then Kronos gets paranoid that one of his kids is going to do to him. He cut off his father's genitals. And yeah, if you take away a person's eros, their passion, then you've taken away what matters, their meaning in life, everything. So Kronos then gets paranoid, and so he eats his children. And the expression there, you can use that expression if a father is just dominating his children. You could say he's devouring his children. He's not giving them a chance to have their own life and their own passion and follow their own sense of meaning. So his wife, consort, was very upset about this. And so she asked Kronos's parents if they'd help her have her son escape. And oh, sure, after what he did to me, of course, I'll help you. So Uranus helped, and Kronos swallowed this rock instead of swallowing Zeus. She wrapped it up in a blanket. And so Zeus escaped, and he was raised in a cave in Crete. Okay, so Crete is important because it was a matriarchy. it was a society run without war. Oh, well, here's another. I'll get to that in a minute. But Zeus is getting raised on Crete. Okay. It was a natural hot springs. So women would wash their clothes and they'd go into a trance. And so they thought this is where Hades is bringing up the messages from the underworld. So, okay. Another, come on. What's with this? Okay. All right, so now it skipped too much. Here's Hades. Yeah, Hades and Persephone have a presence there when you go there. It's near the sea, so Poseidon has a presence there. Demeter, it was the site of the goddess, and Demeter is now represents what's left of the goddess. Then the story of the killing of the python is reenacted every year at that spot, which is a lot like Easter. You have the story of the last week of Jesus' life. You know, we recreate these stories. It's religious rituals are like that. And here, after Apollo killed the snake, he had to go and serve penance for 7 years. He was a shepherd. There still are sheep there. And a shepherd is somebody who tends to the sheep, but ultimately the goal is to eat the sheep, right? So you're domesticating them. And so now nature is going to serve human interests, but not in a violent, exploitative way. Then Apollo returns with his mother and his sister. So he's incorporating respect for women, right? Into his, again, it's not dominating, it's not, or shouldn't be, force and control. He just brings her back. So now what used to be a goddess centered, now it's reason is ordering things, but it includes women. You know, women are a very big presence there. Apollo had a certain lyre, his favorite lyre, and there's certain music that's very Apollonian, which is very ordered, quiet, you know, just like rational thinking. To me, Bach, you know, and the Age of Reason, the music that comes out of that is very ordered. Okay, so then there's also a theater right above it. And so you're supposed to go to the theater, flush out all your irrational desires. And let's see. Okay, and this is also, okay. So the Oracle at Delphi was a place that represented natural justice, the rule of reason, and the rule of law. So now instead of the goddess, you're having the rule of law, and these laws are created by human reason. So when a ruler, oh, the limit, okay, the Sphinx is there, and there are limits to reason, always reminding you that you can't worship reason, that Apollo has to be accountable to these other forces around him. The Sphinx was the story of Oedipus, is that he solved the riddle of the Sphinx. So he was brilliant, but he did not know himself. The truth about him was that he killed his father and married his mother. And so that the Sphinx is always reminding you that you might have some stuff buried in your unconscious, and you need to keep aware of that, because reason itself is not a full life, and it's not justice. And then there are a lot of little statues to Hercules, and he was a flawed character, but he had these 12 labors. He killed his son, he had to do penance. But the idea, again, is that life is like this. People are not perfect and people struggle, but they can prevail. The gods were on opposite sides in the Trojan War, so the message here is life is complicated. But it's clear one side was better than the other. So the Trojans, Aphrodite and Ares are the two biggest threats to civilization. Just sexual aggression and attraction where people just forget about all their commitments and their marriages and their families. Just blow everything up. Or war, of course, brutalizes people. So Ares and Aphrodite were on the side of the Trojans, but so was Hector. And so Apollo switched sides. And so it's complicated, right? And every god, just like every human being in a tragedy, they all have arguments for why they're right. All right, so the fact that the stone is there indicates that in this case, the priests representing Apollo, the ones giving you your advice, because you come there for advice, they respect Zeus, right? They are dedicated to justice, not just reason. And also, there's a temple to Athena right outside of the site. So when you're coming to visit the site, you pass by this temple to Athena. And so you know that the site is protected by Athena, the goddess of justice and wisdom. But she also gives counsel to the priests, right? The priests are accountable to Zeus and Athena. Okay, it was built, okay, the temple was built on these shrines that, again, had been originally for female deities, but they were, each of the gods has, there's the different branches of their personality. And the two branches of Athena that were present at this site were her most maternal ones. Her protection of fertility and as a midwife, and then her craftsmanship. Okay, so she protects from outside aggressive. She protects from brutality, from unjust aggression. Okay. All right, so reason and justice, people disagree. Everyone, this is a dialectical tradition. It's not principles, it's conversations. And you have to keep all the contexts in view, and you have to consider everything. So Delphi was set up to promote justice. And it's like the United Nations, it's international. And the message is that there is natural justice. There are natural standards of justice. And a king, a ruler, cannot control what is just, right? Nothing is just because I said so, right? Might doesn't make right. So every king is accountable to a higher standard of justice. The original priests were from Crete, and that's important because it was a maternal culture. It was female-centered, and the people chosen to come over and be the first priests were not warriors. They were businessmen because they were traders. Their culture was based on trade and diplomacy and building economic ties with other city-states so that they can prevent war. You know, they have something at stake. They would lose if they go to war. And so these priests understood international, they traveled a lot, so they would have good judgment about what is international justice as opposed to what is just relative to my society. Then the other big thing about this site is when a king comes for advice, he doesn't get an answer to a question. He gets a riddle. And the suppliant, the one coming, has to solve the riddle and has to take responsibility for how they interpret the riddle. I think that's perfect because I think all of those ancient books, the Old Testament, the New Testament, Confucius Analects, the Quran, they're all a matter of interpretation. They say a lot of things, and you're responsible for which quotes you pick out or how you apply to a situation. That's on you. And so they come, but they're still morally responsible for how they interpret the riddle. There was a famous example of a king who wanted to go to war. And he asked, should I go to war? And the oracle said, if you go to war, a great nation will be destroyed. Of course, he used it as an excuse. Well, the great nation was his own. And so you got to be careful. The priests would send out spies so that if someone was going to come and ask about war with another city-state, the spies would go and see if this was going to be a rout, it was just going to be a massacre. Then they would tell a riddle that would discourage the king from doing it. Let's see. There's purification. So before they come, before they go to hear the riddle, they have to wash with that in a bath. That's a ritual bath because you want to wash off your soul, right? And then there are these two maxims engraved in the temple: know thyself and nothing in excess. So if you're greedy, if you're power hungry, if you're proud, I mean, if you have a bias, you're going to misinterpret. And if you don't know yourself, right? What you know, what you don't know, what you have power over and what you don't live an examined life, you're going to misinterpret the riddle. So please hang in there, get it right. The Olympics, there's an Olympic stadium, and the Olympics also has a sound mind and a sound body. You have to have discipline for wisdom. And then they have the charioteer. This was found at the site. And so that idea is that you're holding the reins, you're controlling and you're guiding your passions. You don't repress too much. You don't allow too much. You want to win the race of life, right? Okay, one more thing. In the temple, the fumes only came up out of, well, let me see. I guess it's later on. I guess I'll get there. There's a camp for the athletes. There is an athletic contest. But when the king comes, he would meet other people, and hopefully, once they develop some friendship bonds, when they know each other as people, they're less likely to go to war. Here's the Pythia, where a woman sits above the place where the fumes are coming, and she inhales the fumes. She goes into a trance, and then the priests interpret the message. She stands for Hestia, right? Hestia is the one that is a messenger, is the listener. She's listening. Okay, and then okay, I already said that. There's an example of a riddle. Then there's a place to speak publicly about justice, about how to act in a situation. Deliberation. This is about what's the right thing to do for the right reason in the right way at the right time and all that. All right. And then Socrates' mission. So there at the temple, there also was, for 9 months, they inhale the fumes. For 3 months, the temple, it's dormant. And so at one end of the temple is a picture of Apollo at the center with his tunic and his favorite lyre, and his mother and his sister. And at the other end is Dionysus with the same tunic and the same lyre, and he has these women, the Meneids. And so every year, Apollo hands over his lyre to Dionysus. And so the center is a center for Dionysus. And the idea there is you have to balance these things. No repression. Repression is bad. So Socrates, the oracle said there's no one wiser than Socrates. And how can this be? He's only a stone cutter. And so he went around and asked people who had reputations for being wise and just, well, what is justice? What is it that gives you, justifies the power, the trust the public has in you? And they couldn't answer. And so, yeah, they got exposed for their corruption, and Socrates got killed because it was his fault that they were exposed. So that's another story to remind people, know thyself. Um, and there's the Athenian treasury. And so the Athenians often tried to bribe the priests. The cities would give a lot of money, but supposedly, it didn't work. Although there are stories where you give enough money and there's like a waiting line for getting the riddle, and you'll sort of get up to the front of the line or something like that. So Hygeia is the goddess of health, and it's sound mind, sound body, sound spirit, right? It's a holistic view of health. And so this class is all about health. So, so the class for the lecture for today is about this very holistic view of health or human flourishing, all the ways things can go wrong, all the ways we're vulnerable. But the Greeks, at a certain point, they realized what we're capable of, and they want to construct a society where as many people as possible have the opportunity to develop and the motivation to develop these higher order capacities, especially to think like a citizen, so they can be self-governing, so they can stay stable, so they can have a middle class, so that they don't degenerate into instability and the rise of an authoritarian leader who will do great and unnecessary damage. Okay, that's the